Let me digress for a moment and just give an example. In 2007, I took on some litigation that for me was probably the most significant litigation I'd done in 30 years. In Colorado Springs, we had a major arson fire that burned down an apartment building where there were over 300 people living. The people who lived in this apartment were, generally speaking, lower income. They were struggling, some of these people. They were doing okay, but it was a lower income, lowest socioeconomic income apartment building. But the owners had advertised that they would provide controlled access entries to their building, and they didn't. And there were hundreds and hundreds of police calls for years to this building. It became known in the police circles as a frequent flyer. They were there all the time, every day, dealing with this building, with drugs, with weapons, with this, with that. And finally, this arsonist came in because his girlfriend was living in the building, and he wanted the girlfriend to come home, and she wouldn't come home, and he was crazy, and he threatened her, and he said, if you don't come home, I'm going to burn the building down. And he was able to just waltz into the building because there were not controlled access entries. And I started getting calls, and at first I said, I don't know about this. I don't know if I'm going to take this on. And people called and they said, well, you know, I've talked to a couple other lawyers, nobody will help us. Everybody who lived in that building lost everything. Nobody was ever allowed to step back into that building. It was a total loss, and because of asbestos in the building, they got nothing back, or very little back. Eventually, the fire department was able to get a few things back, but very, very little. So if you can imagine that you wake up, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, it was in a January, freezing cold January morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, you hear commotion and screaming, and all of a sudden, and you are faced with having to flee for your life to get out of this building. 2 people died, a number of people were injured. And clients started coming to us. First 5, then 10, then 20, then 30. Ultimately, we ended up with 60 clients who had been displaced from this building. The common theme for these people was that they were really, really angry. They were angry at the management company. They were angry at the arsonist. Some of these people had asked the management company to lock the doors, fix the doors. The doors couldn't be fixed. The doors were broken, so they couldn't be locked. And many people had complained, got to lock these doors. There's people hanging out. There's people sleeping in our hallways. You got to do something, and the management company never did. So they were really, really angry with the management company. Of course, they were very, very angry with the arsonist who came and torched this building and burned the building down. And so one of the things that I tried to do early on, one of the first meetings I had in this case with defense counsel, I said, you know what? I said, this case cries out for a restorative practice. Maybe we could get the management company, maybe the arsonist, maybe some victims together, and we could have a restorative practice. What do you think happened? It didn't work. That was early on. And I will tell you that 2 years later, and probably close to $750,000 to $1 million worth of legal fees was spent on this litigation. Just legal fees. And ultimately it settled. But the clients had been put through a horrific experience twice. Once when they fled for their lives from the building, and 2 when they had to go through 2 years worth of litigation just to get what they wanted, which was either an acknowledgement, an apology, and of course what they needed was to repair the harms, in this case the loss of all of their possessions. And they got none of that. Most of these people would never have sued had someone come to them early on and said, we are very sorry for your loss. What can we do to help? You mean you lost all of your things? Can you give us a list and we'd be glad to help you repair those things, replace those things? It didn't happen. It was a crime. I mean, it was really terrible to see these people go through this. People had to sit through 6 and 7 hours of depositions, talking about the most private things of their lives. For what? So that the defense counsel could do their discovery. It was terrible. After that, I decided that in a way to help the community, but also to remind myself of the terrible litigation that this was, that I was part of, and that this situation caused, we formed the Castle West Foundation. The name of this building was called the Castle West Apartments. And my partner and I formed the Castle West Foundations. And one of the tenets of that foundation is to implement restorative practices in litigation such as that, so that people such as these tenants from the Castle West Apartments won't have to go through that again, if at all possible. I don't know whether it'll be possible, but maybe we can make some small inroads in that. And if we keep in mind what those people had to go through, it'll give us motivation to keep going. And I'm sure there's lawyers from around the country that have story after story after story of that very similar thing, of their clients going through this kind of litigation and adversarial process, destructive, dehumanizing process that doesn't have to occur. For me, I think the heart and soul of practicing law for the past 30 years really has been my being able to intertwine the kinds of concepts we've talked about, restorative justice and mediation and alternative practices, into a traditional litigation practice. I think if I just litigated, I don't think that would have made it for me. But I've seen enough positive benefits in helping people through the practice, through the process of litigation, in a humane way, in a way that helps them heal. And that's really made a difference for me. And I think will continue to make a difference for me as I transition out of the traditional litigation practice and move more into the restorative mediation practice.